I feel sad. Sad? Nobody feels sad, you puff. Here, take some fucking drugs. Go back to work. They'll numb out those feelings. Hello. So I've been asked the question, is there a biological basis for depression? My stance on this is very much in the camp of saying no. But let's be clear. Psychiatry is a modern branch of psychology, and psychology is a branch of philosophy. It's actually a branch of philosophy. Now, I'm all for being rational and following the Western scientific method, but that does not make psychology a science. And as much as it aspires to be, it can't be a science in the way that physics is. And the more you try and make it that, the dumber it gets. And in psychology, there are as many different models of the mind as there are people who propose models of the mind, because these things are not testable. They're not in psychology. There is no physical test for depression. We can't take a blood sample from you and find strains of the depression virus in there. And you've also got to remember that these things in psychiatry are voted on. The existence of a mental illness is voted on. When the DSM is released, I think every 4 years, psychiatrists vote on which illnesses stay in and which go out. And narcissism is not in the latest edition of the DSM. They took it out. But nail biting is in. A whole stream of other, mental illnesses are in there. And you've got to ask the question, why? Why was narcissism taken out? Why are all these other illnesses in there now? You've got to remember, with all of these things, with all of these mental illnesses, it takes place within consciousness. And that is a very hazy realm that is hard to pin down. It's mercurial. It moves. The more you try and grab hold of it, the more it shoots away from you. The way I always see consciousness, and the catch-22 of consciousness, is you're using human consciousness to study human consciousness, and that's a problem. It's a really big problem. It's like taking a torch beam and trying to get the torch beam to shine back on itself. To be clear, all your emotions are rooted in the body, and all of your emotions are rooted in the brain, and even a lack of emotion is rooted in the body and the brain. But the question here is, the implicit question, is if you say, is there a biological root for depression? Well, yes, because you're a biological entity. This phenomena, as it's described, this social construct, this word, depression, is occurring within you, and you're a biological entity. So yeah, there's a biological root from that point of view. But that's where it ends. To then make the leap to there is an anomaly within your brain and therefore you're depressed is not provable, and there is zero scientific evidence to support that. And it's a mistake to apply this Western medical model of the body to the mind. It doesn't work. Consciousness is great when it's directed in a certain direction, but it's hard to direct it back on itself. And the only way to do it successfully, really, is through introspection, is through meditation. Scientists hate introspection, as well they should. So where does that leave us? Well, if there's no biological or scientific test that can prove that depression is an anomaly or a chemical imbalance in the system, why take medicine to deal with it? So it gets a little bit more complicated than that, all right? Because what happens is, if you consistently think a thought and you consistently behave in a certain way, your body does actually produce chemicals or ceases to produce chemicals, and it does actually create a biological environment that will support certain emotions. So the issue then is to say, well, okay, but what are we talking about here? Are we talking about genetic determinism? Are we saying that genetically you're prone to schizophrenia, you're prone to depression? And people then use horribly, this is not science to do this, they use anecdotal evidence. They'll say, I have schizophrenia in my family. I have depression in my family. I have anxiety in my family. And my response to that is, yes, humans are very good at learning. Yes, children learn from adults. Yes, if your parents had a psychosis, you have that psychosis. I have a fear of roller coasters. I have a fear of turbulence on flights. Guess what? Both my parents had that. These are learnt behaviours. There's no gene for fear of roller coasters. So if not just your parents, but major role models in your life when you were growing up did a certain thing, you're likely to do it too. These are unconscious patterns. This is how animals learn. At the deepest levels, we watch what role models do and we internalize all that very, very quickly with no conscious checking of what's going on. So then we come to the issue that a lot of people will be asking, because there's a lot of people on antidepressants, is, are you saying I don't have an illness? Are you trying to devalidate me? Are you one of these people who's basically saying I'm lazy or I just can't take control of my life? No. Are you saying I shouldn't be on antidepressants? Yes. But I'm not saying drop them now, because once you're on them, they're such powerful drugs that if you stop taking them straight away, the effect can be devastating. So you have to find a way of stop taking them that works for you over time, and you should do that with medical supervision. You should say, I want to stop taking these. What's the recommended way of scaling down my dosage so I don't need them anymore? Am I trying to take something away from you? No. The effect of deeply held emotion, or the lack of emotion, the numbness of emotion that depression is a real phenomena. I'm not taking that away from you. You do have a problem. And this kind of mental suffering can be absolutely hellish. Just so you know, because your doctor didn't tell you this, the drugs that you're taking are the drugs that have been most effectively sold and marketed to the doctors, to the medical community. And the drugs that you're taking have what they call a shotgun approach. So there's a whole cloud of symptoms, and there are various different drugs within that drug that they fire at that cloud of symptoms, and then they just see what sticks. Maybe it'll work, maybe it won't. I think it's dangerous and disempowering to believe that it's just a chemical imbalance. There's nothing I can do about it. I have to take drugs. You and I and everybody as a sovereign human being should exhaust every other possibility first before taking any drugs for anything. You know, you're being told there's something wrong with you, and that's what I resent. That's why I don't subscribe to that model, is because I don't believe there's anything wrong with the individual, but I think there's a hell of a lot wrong with society and with culture as it stands today. The narcissistic abuser in this situation is the powers that be. They're like the narcissistic parental abuser. They don't care about your happiness. They just want you to shut the fuck up and go back to work. That's what giving somebody an antidepressant pill is. Oh, there's something wrong with you? Oh, poor baby, fucking have some... Oh, such an act of aggression. How devaluing of you is that? When somebody comes to me and they're chronically depressed and they can't break out of what that emotional state is, why would I assume that they have some biologically created virus, some chemical imbalance? This is the complexity of it. There is a biological imbalance, but the biological imbalance of the brain chemistry is not something that's just randomly occurring to you like a bolt from the blue. I always say it's in your environment. Maybe you're sad. Oh, I'm experiencing depression. Oh, okay, you have an illness, you're depressed. Take this pill. To me, that's the most horrendous violence. It's violence against the individual. Why are you being told that there's something wrong with you? Maybe there's something wrong with society. On some primal level, you're aware that you're being jibbed. You're aware that you're being ripped off. Your life isn't fun. It's not enjoyable. You didn't choose this. We're given the illusion of choice. Oh, you can exchange your pebbles that you got working at the fucking mill for a few trinkets and a few seconds of happiness. We'll let you buy alcohol so you can get smashed out of your mind. We'll let drugs illegally flow through the country so that every weekend you can go out and maybe snort some badly cut cocaine, maybe take a few pills, take some ecstasy and get a little cheap, dirty high for a few hours and then feel like shit for the next 2 days. Why would you need to do that? Why would any normal, healthy, balanced human being who's enjoying their life feel the compulsion to do those things? If you're depressed, it might be because you're intelligent. If you're depressed, it might be because you're a decent human being who looks at the horror of what this world has become and feels sad. Maybe you should feel sad. Maybe we shouldn't stigmatize sadness. Well, you might be sick because you've ingested the poison of the world, but the world is a sick environment. If you're mentally feeling unbalanced, I would say that's a natural, normal human response to what's out there. But this is what's not being discussed. Is what is depression? Well, maybe depression is a rational response to a fucked up world. Maybe you should be depressed because you're angry, you're sad. And it tends to be the sensitives, it tends to be the more intelligent, it tends to be the people who are questioning reality and going, hey, hang on a second, maybe this isn't the way it should be. Or it could just be that you're being ripped off. So it's a complicated issue. It's more rooted in issues of society and culture and where we're up to. I'm very much of the Zimbardo school of thought, which is that environments create personalities. Genetics don't create personalities. Genetics determine eye colour. My advice to you is, if you're on antidepressants, is to find a way to start coming off them. Let's look at what got you onto them in the first place, without assuming that there is something wrong with you.